and Hagmann Report for today. It is a frantic Friday edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. It is the 20th day of December 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host along with my son Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Folks, you're about to hear an incredible program, 3 hours of live news, information, analysis, things you need to know in these very, very, very perilous times. And perilous they are. For new listeners, and we have many, I want to say thank you for checking in with us over the last couple of days. You're listening to the only show where we provide the news in 3D. We drill down into the depth. We go beyond the headlines and bylines, and we don't pay attention to the candy-coated news, but look into what's behind it. And we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Our home base, HomelandSecurityUS.com. That's HomelandSecurityUS.com. From there, you can get to our archives. You can get to our live broadcasts, the entire gambit of things. Also, new articles that we generate personally. We don't aggregate the news. We provide it based on our investigative information. We're also simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There you can listen to us live. The Hagmann and Hagmann Report.com. You got to spell it all out, though. It's the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.com. We're really under the gun today. Just an incredible flurry of information, news, very critical pieces of information that we want to get out to you today. This program that you're really going to need to know, folks. If things do work out correctly, here's the plan for tonight as the program unfolds. About the second hour tonight, I think Mike from Full Spectrum Survival is going to be on with us talking about some news. Going to reference the rollout of the news in 2 minutes that we are now providing exclusively through the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, also at FullSpectrumSurvival.com. The top of the third hour. This is extremely important, folks. Extremely important. I have convinced the gentleman who has provided me with so much information, the Benghazi information, convinced him to spend a few minutes talking to us about a couple of very critical, very important developments. And these developments do surround the among other things, the capturing from within of this administration, or this government, I should say, not this administration. Also, I'm not sure if anyone is aware of this right now, and more about this as the program unfolds. Remember, if you're old enough, remember the gas lines of 1973? Well, folks, we have our strategic petroleum reserves. The last public time, I think, that there was anything referenced was back in December of last year. Well, as of December 21st, 2012, there was about 695 million barrels, or a 36-day oil supply for the United States, based on a 19.5 million level of consumption, 19.5 million barrels per day consumption. Well, that has changed. It is now about a week. Think about this, folks, in the context of us pushing away Saudi Arabia, of us saying to Saudi Arabia, you know what, we're going to realign things here. And that's essentially what we've done, and we're pushing Saudi into the Chinese camp. Well, what happens when that spigot is shut off in light of the fact that the pipeline is not going to be supplying our refineries in the United States with oil? You talk about grinding everything, bringing everything to a grinding halt. That's where we stand right now. And if that does not frighten you, if that does not cause you to stand up and say, wait a minute, if that doesn't cause you to want to grab your representative or your senator and shake them by the shoulders and say, hey, what's going on here? Then I don't know what will, because the gas lines of the 70s are going to look like, we are going to wish to be back into the early 70s for gas lines. This is how critical this is, and it brings me to the issue: who's running things? Who is running things? Because this is no accident. This is deliberate. This is a deliberate agenda, and it's not an American agenda. And the other thing too is the program develops. Who's making the decisions to bring in? We need to know once and for all how many foreign troops we have on our soil, why they're here, and what's going on with that. Because we do have National Guard troops. If there's an emergency, of course, the National Guard gets called out, and if the emergency is big enough, the National Guard from other states gets tapped in. Why do we need foreign troops? Why do we need foreign troops, whether they're Russian or Chinese, and especially if they're Russian? Didn't Russia say recently, hey, we're going to strike the United States if we have to with nukes? Are these the people that need to be, or that should be on our soil? Who's behind this agenda? Think back to Bill Clinton during his first brought into the government. And you're going to find people deny that he said this, but it's on record. Clinton said, he was asked if there was a shadow government or a secret government, and he basically said, I'm paraphrasing now, no, if there is, excuse me, if there is, I'm not in charge of it. Well, who the heck is? We deserve to know this. Who is? Joe, welcome.
Very glad to be here. It's one of these thank goodness it's Friday days. It was a rough day. Everybody's out before Christmas. Everybody's acting, a little hyped up and driving crazy, acting crazy. And it's been stressful if you're just running around doing normal errands, not even shopping. Or we had some issues with our dog. We had to take him back to the vet again. And
I've got water in my house in my basement. I've got.
I laugh because the sub pump's working. The water used to come out of the drain, but this is a new, interesting
development.
Issue.
Yes, it's
the source.
Mystery water.
We've narrowed it down, but we don't know if it's coming from between the pipe and the floor, from the wall and the floor. But yeah, it is.
We could
interesting
have
as we had
some
30
demon-possessed entity peeing in the corner. I'm sorry.
Yeah, last weekend we had 30 inches of snow basically, and that's been sitting here until today. It started raining today. It's about 45. It was about 50 here almost earlier, and they're calling for 2 inches of rain tomorrow. We've had a flood watch in effect since yesterday or the day before, and it could get bad for some people up here because we've seen it flood up here a few times in my life, some historic type floods. And I remember when I was in 8th grade, my father and I were talking about this earlier today. He pulled me out of school, and we all went over to my grandmother's house. And she lived in her basement would get water in it here and there, but this water was almost up to your waist. And we stayed there for probably 8 hours with buckets.
And it wasn't clean water either.
Carried bucket by bucket the whole flooded basement and dumped it back outside. But, yeah, it's...
thank you, by the way, in the chat room. Trust me, everything's draining away from the house. I just made sure of that earlier. No, not earlier. I mean, this summer, just for this purpose. And I'm pulling my hair out because when I looked at my house earlier today and walked around, it's just we just have the entire area has just got standing water so bad. In places it's never been before. Well, you said it, Joe. 4 feet of snow. It was 20 degrees 2 days ago, and with 4 feet of snow, and now it's 50, and all the snow is melting, and it's raining.
Yeah, and we're going to get substantial amounts of rain. What do they say? Every inch of rain equals 10 inches of snow. So if that'd be like getting another snowstorm this weekend if it was colder. But,
right. So, I mean, it's just between that, the traffic, the people, the calls, every other the second, it's just one thing after another. So, but what we're trying to do today, though, is really reinforce what's really important to you. This Duck Dynasty stuff is important in the larger context.
Yeah.
Because it's an assault on two things. Number one, our First Amendment, and number two, the moral fabric of our country.
Yeah, these are eroding our core values. They're destroying the society and destroying the morality of society, saying it's normal, saying you're born this way, and going through all this. And I was going back, and before the show I even listened to it with my dad, but I listened to the Paul Harvey clip, If I Were the Devil, today a few times, and started to take notes on different points he made, and just about everything he said in that audio has come to fruition. But he talks about the takeovering of, I would not be happy till I seized the ripest apple on the tree, talking about America. And he first says the first thing he would do, he didn't mention anything about politics, anything about the economy. He said, I would subvert the churches first. And whether that's historically accurate as to how our country's been subverted, I don't know. But the churches have been subverted. They have been...
I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, they have been taken over. And now they are being shaped by world opinion, by secular influence. And in some cases, darker, more evil influences. And that's not all churches. That's some churches. And we see that this trend of demoralization, there was that interview that G. Edward Griffin did with the KGB agent in 85, I believe. I don't remember his name. I have the audio clip on my computer. And he talks about the demoralization, destabilization, and how the steps to conduct this in a country, how to bring this about in any nation that you follow a set of guidelines, set of plans. And in the interview he gave in 85, he talks about how astounded and happy he was to see how influenced and taken over we already were at that point. And he said it takes 3 generations. And he said, we're seeing the last generation now. So that was 20, 25, 30, almost 30 years ago.
Well, I got to tell you, if you really want to get into the plans, the blueprint, in addition to the books that we've told you about, None Dare Call a Conspiracy, Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins, other books, in addition to the more current books, but one in particular, the unabridged copy of Tragedy and Hope, History of the World in Our Time by Professor Carroll Quigley. Carroll Quigley, of course, is talks about the history of the world in the context or through the prism of the New World Order. And we know, of course, Carroll Quigley is the man who Bill Clinton bows to, or bowed to. Of course, Quigley's dead now. But, folks, if you have the opportunity, please learn as much as you can about Carroll Quigley. Learn as much as you can about the relationship between Quigley, how Quigley affected Clinton, and you'll see how things are playing out. By the way, when it goes to who's running things, of course, this is one other thing to keep in mind. I'm kind of going on a little tangent here, but I think it's important to tangent, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you, Joe.
If you get out of control, we'll rein you back in.
Yeah. Boy, I'm just really not in a good mood today. Sorry.
What else is there?
Yeah, I know. The issue here with Quigley and Bill Clinton in CFR, how this is all playing out is, I see so many people talking about the midterm elections, and so many people putting their hope there, and so many people saying, well, our guy, is going to fix things. And so many people, even talking about Darrell Issa, for crying out loud. And I'm trying to look for my notes I had here. Hang on a second. Here they are. Darrell Issa. How's this for live radio anyway? Isn't it funny that Issa...
Terrible. No, I'm kidding.
Back in, I got the Nerf bat. Thank you, Clint, for the Nerf bat. I've got, Issa back in 2001. Let me just see if... Well, you're going to have to take my word for it. Issa in 2001, his position, I just knocked over a lamp. That's great. His position in 2001 was different than look at ICE's positions on things, and look at how he has morphed into the guy he is today.
Positions on things. I just want to jump in and say one thing.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I heard Mitch McConnell. Didn't Mitch McConnell get this huge $3 billion project in his district out of this budget deal? Or was that the sequester? Because he voted against that budget deal. But these politicians, people like Darrell Issa, all of them, they are following instructions that are given to them. They don't have their own ideas or plans, or they don't have their own belief systems. These people are bought, and the people who purchase them decide what they'll support and what they won't support.
Well, exactly.
Maybe there's a few exceptions, but I'm not sure even about that.
All right. Well, it's and the people behind the people, the Council on Foreign Relations, all of these secret societies, and how this is all playing out, all of these secret societies, including and especially the Rhodes Scholarship. Folks, understand what the Rhodes Scholarship is all about. Understand who the Rhodes Scholars are. And you'll find that many of the current politicians or people in power, you'll find that they're educated through, or they received the Rhodes Scholarship. Well, that in order to become a Rhodes Scholar, you've got to take an oath. An oath. You've got to swear allegiance to a foreign power, ultimately. Now, you can research this on your own to understand the complexities and the nuances of that particular scholarship, and you'll have to understand who John Ruskin is. Why am I talking about this? Well, because many of the people in power, even Susan Rice, for example, and others, both Republican and Democrat, it doesn't really matter, have this scholarship behind them. Go ahead.
A basic rundown of what this was named after Cecil John Rhodes. It's an international postgraduate award for select foreign students to study at the University of Oxford.
It's I see you stopping right there.
Quick synopsis of what it does.
Right, but it actually gets into more than that. In order to qualify for it, you've got to go through interviews. You've got to be selected for it, and the selection. Now, Obama was not selected for a Rhodes Scholarship, but does that mean anything? Well, not really. His lack of selection by the Rhodes Scholarship Board does not necessarily mean that his agenda is not consistent with that of a foreign entity, namely the UK. On the other hand, those people who are Rhodes Scholars, there's a solid connection there between the supremacy of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, of the British Empire, subjugating it to the Constitution of the United States. This is why it's important. But then we come into the Council on Foreign Relations and these other groups. Well, it's against our Constitution to be a part of these other groups. This CFR members. I mean, think about this. John McCain, Mitt Romney.
The Logan Act is one. It says in the Constitution that you are not, while you are holding office, a public office as in the federal government, you are committing an act or committing a crime to swear allegiance, take an oath, or be invested in another. And the best example I can give is when Obama became president in December of 2009. While he was president, he served as the head of the UN Security Council. That was a violation of the law.
Right. Sorry about that. I got distracted. I was looking at something that had nothing to do with me whatsoever. I apologize for it. Okay.
So you're sure that when we were at the vet that he hit the dog and not you? I remember you joking about that last time.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that so, okay, we're having our informant come on at 10 o'clock Eastern time, the started at the top of the third hour. Yeah, no, it would have been better if he did. But the Council of Foreign Relations members, Fred Thompson, Rudy Giuliani, John McCain, Mitt Romney, Newt Gingrich, Hillary Clinton, well, of course, Barack Obama, John Edwards, Joe Biden, Chris Dodd, Bill Richardson. Think about that list of names. It goes across all political parties. The Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, is the American branch of a society which originated in the UK and Great Britain and believes national boundaries should be obliterated and a one-world rule established. Who said that? Well, I'll tell you who said that. Carol Quigley, member of the CFR, mentor to Bill Clinton, and, of course, the author of Tragedy and Hope. Admiral Ward, one of the ruling members of the CFR shadow government, once the ruling members of the CFR shadow government have decided that the U.S. government should adopt a particular policy, very substantial research facilities of the CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy and confound and discredit intellectually and politically any opposition. And that is by Admiral Chester Ward, former CFR member, Judge Advocate General of the U.S. Navy. Folks, we are under the control of a foreign power, much against the Constitution of the United States. All parties are involved in this. All political people are involved in this, as far as I could tell, which, again, I started out the show by saying, well, look at our strategic oil reserves. We are down now to about a week's worth of petroleum reserves right now. A week's worth. So what would happen when Saudi Arabia turns off the oil spigot? Is it going to be an accident that our country is going to be grinding to a halt? Is this the only thing that's going to happen? Wouldn't it be better, or wouldn't it be interesting if things happened concurrent with one another? Remember the Job? Yesterday I was talking about the Bible verse from Job. Remember that, about the messengers, the successive messengers?
Yeah.
If you go to, and I just want to hit this again. If you go to Job, chapter 1, I think it's verse, let's see here. We'll start at verse 12. The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has in your power, but on man himself do not lay a finger."
Now there's two instances of this, and let me lay this out for people who aren't familiar with this. Job was a devoted believer in the Lord. Satan was wandering the earth and saying, who is there that is faithful to you? And the Lord said, "Well, have you considered Job, my servant Job?" And Satan says, "Well, you have a hedge of protection around him. He has, a beautiful family. He's got property, livestock. His life is good. Of course he worships you and believes in you. But you put your hand on him to take that away, and we'll see if he worships you." And this is interesting, and we can really get into this because there's a lot of the book of Job is a message of the nature of Satan and, more importantly, the power of faith and the rewards of faith. But the Lord says to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power, or thy power. Be upon himself, put not forth thy hand." So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. So the Lord gave Satan permission to do certain things. And the second time, when Job does not rebuke the Lord, he says, "Well, he has his health." Satan comes back to the Lord and says, "Well, yeah, we took away, give his family diseases, took away his livestock, his property. He went from being rich to poor, but he still has his health. Of course, he's going to still worship you." And the Lord and Satan says to the Lord, "Put your hand on him, take that away." And the Lord says, "No, it's in your hands, but do not take his life."
Well, right, and this is where I look at this, because people ask, and let's compare it to the situation today. Let's compare it to the average American, or the average. It doesn't even have to be American. the average person, free person of the world, or average person of the free world, what can we expect to see happen? And this was explained to me by a friend of mine who is plugged into things. Expect a series of things, and used the Job story as an example. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said the oxen were plowing and donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you. While that messenger was still speaking, yet another messenger came and gave another bad message. And then while that messenger was still speaking, another messenger came. And while that messenger was still speaking, yet another messenger came. And so it went. Folks, that's how things are going to play out wherever you are. Especially in the United States, wherever you are in the free world, that's how things are going to play out. One messenger is going to be giving you the bad news about the economy, and then another messenger is going to be giving you the bad news. It's not just the economy. It's the power grid. And then while that messenger is still speaking, another messenger is going to give you more bad information. And this is this 1, 2, 3, 4 punch, and you know what? It's going to be a cascading effect, and people are going to say, well, I shouldn't say people. The government will say, or the people in power are going to say, well, we couldn't have prevented it. It was just this cosmic accident, when in fact it was no accident. It is no accident. It is exactly what is being planned for us. Free world. And you know, the world revolves around energy. I got to go back to the opening statement. While everyone is being distracted, or everyone is looking at the kerfluffle over the Duck Dynasty people, yeah, I said kerfluffle, the Duck Dynasty situation, that's important. It's important for not the reasons being publicized, but it's important. But the real thing, what's going on behind the scenes? Well, our petroleum reserves are down to a week. And we are now giving the proverbial finger to Saudi Arabia and saying, you know...
You say down to a week, and I know
based on
why you say that.
Current oil consumption.
Okay, current oil consumption, but we have more reserves than any other nation, I believe. We have also more oil in our land. If we were to start fully using the resources and getting all the oil we can out of the USA, we'd have, and with our reserves and that oil, we'd have more than Saudi Arabia and Russia even combined, maybe.
Okay, that's correct, but why aren't we? It takes time to do that. It takes time to do that, plus the lift costs are higher in America, for example. The reason Saudi Arabia is so important and the wells under Saudi Arabia's control is so important is because the lift costs are lower. It's cheap oil, is what I'm saying. And it takes time to get the refineries ready, because the refineries here and everywhere, the refineries have to refine they refine the oil based on the grade or the type of oil. So if you bring in a certain type of oil, and this is why you hear about Texas sweet, Texas, and various other types of oil. Well, why do you hear about that, and why should you care? Well, it's because the refineries are geared to refine a certain product. Now, I'm making blanket statements here. There are going to be exceptions, and people might argue the details, the minor details with me, and that's fine. If you're an oil guy out there, I understand. There's nuances, but in the larger sense, because we can't go down every single road here. Just understand this. We have been cut off. The people in power have deliberately sabotaged our oil supply. And whether it's the pipeline taking oil to the refineries, or whether it's not getting into and starting drilling here, because you just can't say on Monday, say we're going to drill up in the Dakotas and then have a product ready to go Friday. It doesn't work that way. So in the meantime, our foreign policy is pushing off Saudi Arabia, the source of the cheap oil, pushing them into the arms of China. Boy, of all places to push them into the arms to, right? So what's going to happen here to America when all of a sudden we cannot get cheap oil, or perhaps we cannot get cheap oil at all? What happens if that happens in the dead of winter, in January, when it's very cold up in the north? How many people are going to die just from that alone? And people are, everyone's looking for this huge biochemical attack or huge nuclear explosion to set us on our ear. Well, how about the simplest of things? How about looking at the oil supply? Wouldn't that, without having to fire a shot, just a few tweaks here and there, wouldn't that grind this country to a halt?
I mean, if I don't wake up and drink my daily cup of oil, you don't want to get on the bad side of me. No, yes. In theory, yes, because how do people get to work? How do people get to see their families and travel and make their vehicles work? I mean, the hydrogen car was taken away so they couldn't have fuel. I rely on fuel because this is the system that they gave us.
And you know what? 25 years from now, we're still going to be running on oil. I don't care what these green people say.
Right. And you have to ask yourself, why oil? Why this system? And there's a number of answers. You can get into the control, the benefits of making alliances with other countries. As we said earlier, America has the ability to produce as much oil as Saudi Arabia or Russia, yet we rely on Saudi Arabia to produce the oil for us and import it from them. That's one reason. Two, it keeps us dependent.
Right.
And they can control the price, the tax on that per gallon, etc. There's multi-agendas at play when it comes to oil.
Well, correct. But the reality of things right now is the fact that we are looking at a crisis in the making. And when the people, every single solitary senator and representative should not leave Washington for a Christmas vacation or Christmas break, or they should be back in D.C. right now. They should stay there and find out who in the world is behind this massive scheme to bring this country to its knees by throttling the oil supply. Where in the world did our reserves go, our petroleum reserves go? Why do we only have a week to 10 days worth of oil reserves? Is that good, especially when we are pushing away Saudi Arabia, the source of our cheap oil? Is this just some sort of accident? And if I hear Occam's razor one more time from somebody, well, they're just stupid. You think, maybe Obama is an empty suit. I'm okay with that. Maybe he is. Well, I'm sure he's a puppet. But don't think for 1 minute there aren't people behind these people that are actually pulling the strings and running this secret shadow government. Look, Clinton said it. Everyone has, nearly all of the politicians or all of the elected officials have referenced in some way, shape, or form a secret shadow government. Carol Quigley talks about a shadow government. Of course, he's the mentor of Bill Clinton, and of course, we have these various groups that are part of the shadow government, from the Bilderbergs to the CFR to the Committee of 300 to the Trilateral Commission, you name it. So all of these people are pulling this puppet strings. So when things do happen, and I can see this now on both sides of the political aisle, the Republicans, the Democrats, which is just a false paradigm anyway, but nonetheless, you're going to have these mindless, mind-numb people come out and say, well, you know what, we couldn't have seen this coming. No, you should have seen it coming because it was the plan all along. It's no accident. Just as the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, that was no accident. Under Bush, no. You got Paulson, you had all of those financial people that were pulling the strings in concert with the people, the shadow government behind this. It was no accident. And those people who say it was an accident, or those people who said, well, we never would have seen that coming, well, they're lying to you. And not only are they lying to you, they're laughing at you. And the people who will fight mindlessly and whatever on message boards and to their neighbors or whatever, say, well, Obama isn't just a total idiot. Well, who's behind Obama, and how did he get there? And if he's such an idiot, then that means that there's a whole lot of other idiots in the world. But the fact of the matter is that there are people behind these empty suits. There are people behind these pretty faces. There are people behind these people that have been elected into power. And, oh, yes, by the way, the election process, do you think that was pure? What about black box voting? Do you think that come 2014, that what's the guarantee that 2014 is going to bring? If you are so tied to the electric process, what makes you think that 2014 the elections there are going to be fair when they haven't been? When there's black box voting, when in fact just on the news, Target, they can't even control they can't control the Target stores, the credit card information from the Target stores. They can't control them. That information, because somebody breached that. They cannot control the information on the Affordable Care Act. Somebody had already breached that. What makes people so doggone sure that the electronic voting process is so secure that that your one vote to candidate A doesn't turn into 100 votes to candidate B? You're not sure. So yet people will mindlessly place their hope, dreams, and future into the hands of this laughable process. And I don't care whether you're listening to this in Europe or South America, Central America, or the United States or Canada. It's all the same. And the same people behind the system are running your countries as well as this country. And this is a global issue. It's not limited to the United States. It's not limited to Canada. It's not limited to your country. This is global. And I'm going to tell you something else. They are turning the thumb screws on us, on the free people, and the people who want to talk about the Duck Dynasty issue, fine. The Duck Dynasty, fantastic. But, talk about the real issue behind that, not about the baloney, the surface, the icing. Get down, drill down into the cake behind it. And then what the cake is and what the real nugget is the fact that the people want to criminalize speech against homosexuality. If you're against homosexuality, if you want to talk about it, or if you want to invoke biblical principles against it, they want to criminalize your speech, make it hate speech, and criminalize it. That is part and parcel to their agenda.
Absolutely. And the elections, just imagine, Obama's not up for re-election in 2016. If we make it there and have another election, all the hype, hysteria, the political theatrics, dragging people into false hope, a sense of false hope, for one side, and the other side, the losing side, into hate and resentment again, and the whole time, all that energy focused around the people involved and the outcome by the American people is worthless because it makes no difference. Just like it would make no difference if Romney were to win the last election and Obama was dethroned. We would be in the same place. We would be facing the same situations. And like this Duck Dynasty thing, I wrote this in chat. Yes, it is a newsworthy story, but it is not as much so to be the headline news of every news agency across the world for 2 days straight. One man's comments and his own personal beliefs based on biblical principles is not newsworthy. The reason they make it newsworthy is because they are labeling it hate speech, vile, absolutely disgusting. They demand action and come against these. Chris Hayes, MSNBC person, said a crude thing. He said maybe he should try it, meaning being gay or engaging in that activity. And that's his right to say it. I don't agree with it. And I think that's a terrible thing to say on TV. But, this is what they take a story, they get you emotionally invested, and then they spin it and turn it around and make it about something that it's not, or something they're adding things to it. And people,
that's right.
We have so many Christians out there who do not understand the biblical truth. We talked about it yesterday when the news anchors say, we saw Obama do this in Egypt, in Cairo, when he gave a speech mocking the Bible. Which scriptures should guide our public policy? Should it be Leviticus, which says eating shellfish is an abomination, or that stoning your child if they stray from the faith? Christians aren't equipped to have these debates because a lot of them don't understand the difference between the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Old Law, and the law that we are under now. So they're at a disadvantage there. And you've seen it on TV if you've been watching. I haven't, but I've heard some clips. and this has been used again, and they take that lack of Christian understanding, if they even have somebody who says they're Christian on there to talk about that, they never bring that up. So there's no counter argument to that or the truth given. And from there, it to somebody who has maybe never heard of the Lord before, which I find hard to believe, or has heard of him but never done the research, it's turning people off because they're like, oh, that's in the Bible? Well, yeah, in Jeremiah, the Lord told them to go, Joshua, to go smote the Nephilim, or the fallen ones, the giants. And L.A. Marzulli talked about this. Why would he, support a genocide? Because it was not his seed. It was not his children. These people are Satan's minions, and
it's not the seed of Adam. It's
right.
a corrupted. It's a corrupt, and that's what people don't understand when we talk about DNA. The importance of this. It's all about the DNA. It's all about the blood. It's all about the bloodlines. It's all about the lineage. It's all about Satan. It's all about the corruption of mankind.
And any person, with a 8th grade education level, who doesn't believe in God, can read the Bible, and to make it look like it's something it's not, making it look like it's promoting something it's not. Where are the people? Where's the news coverage of the people with their counter answers? Where's the real Christians standing up and saying, look, the man said his own opinion. He said it, and he was correct on speaking about biblical truth, but it wasn't even just about homosexuality. It was about adultery. It was about greed. It was about drunkards. He said these people will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. He was talking about sin, people who are actively and willfully engaged in sin.
And I'm going to tell you something else. The very people who are speaking out on this topic, against the Christians, against the moral fabric, are the people who are being paid and guided by the Obama tyrannical regime. And people say, well, and I've heard people say this, well, we're not living under tyranny. Well, okay, fine, because we still have the ability to speak. How long to speak our minds? Really, wait a minute. Did you just not hear what we just said about Duck Dynasty guy? Where does that fit in? It fits in because they want to criminalize certain speeches or certain speech. And once that happens, once they are successful,
yep,
that's all over. It's all over.
Absolutely right. I mean, they're working on this on not just the homosexual front. They're working on it on the right-wing extremist front. They're working on it with the so many different aspects. If you are in opposition, and we've seen this come out in so many different stories, they make up any marginalization and tactic that turns people off of the main issue. We see this on internet forums and in chat rooms. Somebody makes a point and brings the truth out. Well, you'll see people in there that will bring people away from that truth by turning it into an argument about an issue that's part of that truth and distracting people from the main point. We see this happening all the time, and this is what is happening here. Speech, the freedom of speech, when we have free speech zones in America, and the Constitution is dead. And free speech...
It's shameful. Those free speech zones are shameful.
So do the rest of the amendments. And I do believe free speech is gone. Yes, we are not incarcerated at this moment for believing in the Lord. And what you say, if we were put on trial to see if we were a Christian or not, how much evidence would be used against you?
Right.
We cannot be used.
If you were to be arrested today for being on charges of being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you?
And there's an article in the Daily Caller today. Carolyn May wrote, the suspension of Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty is outrageous in a nation that values freedom, according to social critic and openly gay dissident feminist Camelia Paglia. I speak with authority here because I was openly gay before the Stonewall Rebellion when it constitutes something to be so. And I personally feel as a libertarian that people have the right to free thought and free speech. this person's a professor at the University of Arts in Philadelphia. She goes on to say, in a democratic country, we have the right to be homophobic. Well, we don't live in a democratic country. But yes, under this republic, we do have the right to our own opinion, as long as we are not, our opinions and our beliefs do not harm another person. And I don't mean offend another person. I mean physically harm, or they don't hinder them from living their life. Then yes, we are entitled to those beliefs. It goes on to say, if people were basing their views against gays on the Bible, again, they have a right of religious freedom there. What about the Muslim community? How many Muslims accept homosexuality?
Well, now we have to parse this out, because wait a second.
Where's the outrage from CARE against this attack of religious freedom, against this attack? Christianity and Islam are two completely separate religions, but they do share this one trait that they don't.
From different perspectives.
Right.
But yes,
Christians don't want to go kill.
They happen to overlap in this one area.
Right. The extreme, some people would say they're not even Muslims, but the extreme Islamists want to kill anybody who won't conform, gay, straight, or purple or blue.
And ladies and gentlemen, let me just say this, because you bring up a good point here, Joe, and I think I want to really drive this home. When I was still under the influence of 9/11, when I was still under the influence of the lies associated with 9/11 and the fallout from 9/11, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, when I was under that influence, I want to be very clear on this. I was following people and listening to people who were just slamming the Islamic community. And I understand that, okay? Now, what happens is there is this lack of intellectual evolution. And I think this is so important, because I think a lot of people fall into this category. When right after 9/11, and we see this on film. We saw it in '85 with that hijacking with John Chestrake, with the pilot of that airline, and that, remember that photo and the 1985 hijacking of that aircraft, and the Muslim out there in the headscarf, and he had the handgun to John Chestrake's, the pilot's head. Okay, well that is the true face of Islam. Yes, I said that. That is the true face of Islam. And yes, Muslims are anti-homosexuality, but it's a very perverse belief. And I'm not saying this from a hate speech standpoint. I'm looking at their own book, the Quran and the Hadith, and every other intellectual and religious book that's associated with this. Now here's wait a second. Here's the issue. Let me just finish this up. If you don't evolve, Islam is not the problem. It is a tool that is being used by the globalists to make you believe it's the problem, and they are allowing Muslims and the Islamic doctrine to be sucked into the American culture, to dilute the Constitution, to actually subvert the Constitution, and then that creates the problem. And then to fix the problem, they've got to toss it all out and start over again. It's the Hegelian dialectic. So the people who are still pounding and have nothing other, who have websites dedicated, and very popular ones at that, and books and whatever, but very popular websites, who do nothing but say, oh, it's the Muslims, and say nothing after that. Those people are still under the influence and have not intellectually grown to the extent to see that it's all an illusion, that it goes far beyond the Muslims. The Muslims are simply a tool, and Islam is a tool to bring in this global governance, this global system of governments, the monetary, the religious, and the political. But see, you still have the same one-note players out there, and they're convincing people, saying, they're hammering on Islam. Again, it's not. That's fine, but evolve. Understand. Take a few steps back and look at the bigger picture. Don't get stuck on that one note. That's all I'm saying, is to see where Islam fits into the even bigger picture. The lie is even bigger than what I'm talking to the people, with those kind of websites and stuff. The lie is bigger than what you are even capable of understanding or willing to understand or have thought about entertaining. That's all I want to say.
And what I wanted to just say is this, not that it would be a bad thing for people of Muslim faith to line up with the Christians here and come against this attack on freedom of religion, freedom of belief, freedom of speech. But if the Muslims did voice their concerns and became outraged, lining up and standing with Christians, that would be good, I believe, but it also poses another threat. It could further the agenda of the gospel of inclusion, as Pastor Paul Begley calls it, or the interfaith, merging of faith.
Exactly. Yep.
If people are not careful.
Very much right on the money. But so which is why this is a minefield. Which is why we cannot allow. I mean, everything that's said, every blog posting from someone who has influence, and this is why I got an email the other day saying you've tapered back your writing. Well, there's about 3 reasons for that. One, I'm involved in a huge project. Another, those are the first 2 reasons. I'm involved in a huge project. That should just be 2 reasons by itself. But the third reason is that you've got to be very careful when you start putting out information. Right now is a very hard, very difficult time, very, very perilous time, because when you have that ability to influence the thought processes of people and the direction that people are thinking, you've got to take it to prayer. You've got to really pray over it. You've got to be sure of what you're saying so you don't screw up. Now, that doesn't mean to undergo the paralysis of analysis. In other words, as I like to say this, become so heavenly minded you're no earthly good. And I realize that some people might take issue with that statement. But if you think about it, it's easy to become paralyzed through consistent, constant analysis and reanalysis and thinking, well, wait a minute, looking at it 5 different ways from Sunday and saying, well, okay, no, you've got to put things out there. However, that does not mean that you type the words as they fall out of your brain into the keyboard and onto the paper and then publish them. Especially if you've got some influence, you've got to be very careful of what you're saying. So, what you just said, Joe, in terms of the Muslims,
that's a far stretch, but that's a possibility,
right? But then, okay, so we would have to use it, and I think that's an important thing. Imagine the Muslims and imagine CARE, and we'll say ACLU, and perhaps even some large Christian organization coming out and saying, well, this is wrong. They all agree on this one point. Well, that's fine, but you've got to recognize the agenda of all parties, because there's different agendas. They're coming at it from different perspectives. The bottom line is, look at the Constitution. If it does not conform to the Constitution, then it shouldn't even be discussed. Yeah, well, it shouldn't even be entertained. But what is being entertained, and what this Duck Dynasty is, everyone's jumping on this as the catalyst to create this hate speech. And I got an email from somebody today. I was able to check my email only briefly, and I've got so many emails to catch up with. Let me just see here. Okay, here it is, right here. Okay. Yeah. By the way, Denise from the UK, thank you very much. God bless you for your email. Appreciate your email. But somebody had sent me an email. I can't find it right off the bat, saying, isn't it interesting how many of these big box Christians pastors are coming out and condemning, or getting behind, I shouldn't say condemning, but getting behind the Duck Dynasty people, or guy, whatever. When they shut up, when they didn't say a word, one word before about the homosexual agenda. It's fun to jump on when it's chic to do so, isn't it? It's great when everyone else is talking about it. Let's pile on. But can they stand alone? And take the homosexual agenda to task. This was from I wanted to say Dana, perhaps M, writes. Haven't you noticed the controversial comments that Phil Robertson made in his interview regarding homosexuality? Now every pastor has something to say about it. Where were those high-profile pastors when the Gay Pride Parade was taking root in Hollywood, in California, or when the rainbow curriculum was being introduced and discussed in the public schools in the 90s? I can go on and on. It sickens me how a man with cojones says what is true, and these media whores now want to stand by a real man and wouldn't dare preach it against it in their pulpits. I thought that was an extremely insightful email, and that's exactly what we have. We've got a bunch of people who are piling on, but where's the outrage over when it wasn't popular to do so? And that's what is going to separate the men from the boys. That's going to separate the truth tellers from the people who are just piling on when they know it's safe and they can get lost in the fog of other people. We are lacking men with the spiritual integrity and the intellectual and moral integrity that we need for today. We're lacking in that so badly. We need people, when it's not popular, to stand up and say, you know what, this is wrong.
Yeah, and people in the chat have said, you know, where's the Joel Osteens, where's the Rick Warrens speaking out on this? You know, if they were to speak out against any group, they would endanger their congregation.
Yeah, I saw Joel Osteen on when I was cleaning up, trying to suck out the water in my basement.
They wouldn't have as much money if they started defending people. And I said they do go to great lengths to make sure they don't offend people. And it's not because they're afraid of offending somebody because of their beliefs. It's because they don't have a rooted, true belief in the Lord. They don't have an understanding of the Lord and His Word, and therefore they are part of the problem, as they have turned Christianity in their churches into a secular religion.
Right. It's a business, 501c3s. They hide behind these things. It's a business to them. While they fly off in their private jets and they live a life of luxury and cushion and cushiness and all that stuff. Come on. Look, if all of the Christians got together right now and spoke out against the tyranny that is developing in this country, we wouldn't have a problem. You know, look back to Germany. Look what happened in Germany. It's the same thing that's happening today, Joe. It really is. We're one crisis away from a full-blown tyranny. We're one crisis away, and this is why I pushed this. When I got this call earlier, I pushed. This is why I'm pushing this petroleum reserves. Can you imagine? Just imagine if the Saudis turn off the spigots, and all of a sudden, people are saying, "Well, geez, I didn't know this. Well, who's watching the store? Who's watching the petroleum reserves? Who's in charge of this?" And everyone is going to make it look like this is a big accident. Folks, we don't need you don't need to look in your rear view mirror or out your living room window, picture window, and see a mushroom cloud in the distance. You don't need that. It's not necessary. All that's necessary is for us to lose that cheap oil, and we're about to. And people are going to say, "Well, we never saw it coming." What? Are you kidding me? We're telling you it's coming. We're telling you it's here right now. Who else is talking about this? Let's start talking about this. Let's start pushing, Look, we made a difference collectively with Benghazi and Syria. We can make a difference in this realm as well. People just need to pay attention. We see a problem on the horizon. We see it coming. It's coming.
And I know we're up against the top of the hour break. There's an article on Infowars.com. Duck Dynasty controversy, Bible to be banned as hate speech. And just real brief,
there you
Duck
go.
Dynasty star Phil Roberts' view on homosexuality has been condemned as hate speech by many. If we are to accept that Robertson's rhetoric represents hate speech, then the Bible should be immediately banned because it openly is against violence and gays. And it goes on to quote scriptures in Leviticus and show some comments from Phil Roberts in this article. And what they are saying here is they're making a point, and there's also an article, the Quran should be banned as hate speech.
And that's exactly, look, this...
and they're not saying that to be true. I mean, the Infowars is
Well, I understand that.
It's a future headline. It's taking it right out of the minds of the people who are organizing this and putting this.
Isn't this the goal of the globalists? Is to create this very pudding-like religion of pudding-like consistency, where it you can put your beliefs in a cup and just shake the cup and it kind of goes one way or the other.
And the Lord and His word does not change, but the society changes their opinions, and people who are against and speak out against their agenda that they are implementing, no matter on what issue, you are a terrorist, you are somebody who is a bully, a hate, fear-mongering person, and they are going to come and call you a racist if you don't like gay people. They're going to call you racist for saying Obamacare. It is this tactic that they use. It's a form of psychological attack. It's a subtle psychological attack and an overt one to those who are aware and awake. And
okay, right. Go ahead. Finish. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I just saw something pass by me, and I don't really. Again, folks, I'm sorry. I do not participate in the chat room. I just saw something pass by me. You don't have to be an expert on fuel trends. You don't have to be. And no one came in and took our reserves. Just think of it this way. All right, we have. Ever since the oil crisis, the manufactured oil crisis of the early 70s, and I'm going to hurry up and explain this, and we'll go to break. But ever since then, we put away oil for a rainy day, hold it in reserve. Well, it's not that somebody went in there and grabbed this oil and stole it from us. What happens is, think of it like a piggy bank, and every week, you're in the process, or every week you're in the habit of putting money in the piggy bank or in your bank book or whatever it might be. Pretty soon you stop doing that. Not only do you stop doing that, you start taking money out and not replacing it for a rainy day. That's the oil reserves. That's what's happening. That's what's happened. No one has kept an eye. There's been no gatekeeper on this, or the gatekeeper has been asleep or willingly turned their heads. And so that we've consumed, this country has consumed the oil. Why? Well, look at the oil, look at the gas prices right now. Have you asked yourself why the gas prices are so low today? Now, when I say low, I'm speaking relative to when it was $4.79, $4.80, pretty much across the country. Have you asked yourself why, and looked at the inflow of oil, petroleum? This is all part of it. Okay, so it's not that not that anyone stole the oil from us. It's just that it was eroded. The conservation was cut back, and in fact, not only was the conservation cut back, but we stopped putting oil away. So now we've only got a week's supply worth, based on current consumption. Now we're heading into winter. And what would happen now if Saudi Arabia says, guess what? You threw us to the wolves. Now, why should we help you? So we're going to cut off your cheap oil. That threatens us as a nation. Our industry grinds to a halt. Our transportation grinds to a halt. And everything that's made out of petroleum, including plastics and everything else, and even medication in certain cases, grinds to a halt. That puts us, that targets our economy, and what is necessary for the New World Order, the globalists, to take over? Well, the death of America as a country, as a sovereign nation. How do they do that? They go against our economy. Well, what's the best way to do that? Should we just blow, an EMP over the country? Well, that's one way. But you know what? Why do that when you can just turn off the oil spigot? And there you have it, folks. It's just that simple. Oh, and while you turn off the oil spigot at the same time, why not throw in another crisis or another one, just like at Job, when one angel or one messenger was speaking, yet another one came.
We have Mike from Full Spectrum Survival on the line, so we're going to go take our break right now. But one sentence, Martin Luther King was talking about the Vietnam War at a church, and he gave a speech, and he said, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. And he was saying the people who aren't picking a side either way and remaining indifferent, and as we talk about, silence, by being silent or indifferent, you are the same as endorsing it, and that goes to the lukewarm reference in Scripture. The Lord said He'd rather you be hot or cold than not caring, because the people who are not caring will be spewed out of His mouth. He wants people who do care and who are engaged. And if you are not going to stand up, and be it a mega pastor, the president, or a homeless guy on the street, it's all the same. Whoever is not proclaiming to be something they're not. These mega pastors have huge congregations, therefore they have a huge responsibility, because they are misleading so many people by their own egos and their own desires. And we're going to go to the break, and we'll pick this up if we have time on the other side after we talk with Mike and our other guest that is going to be calling in. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann on December 20th, 2013. Only 5 days left till Christmas, 4 days left till Christmas. I hope everybody has their plans in order and things are going smoothly for them. Without further ado, we have Mike from Full Spectrum Survival on. You heard the news in 2 minutes during the break. He is the co-founder of Full Spectrum Survival. You can go to his website and his YouTube channel. His website is fullspectrumsurvival.com and Full Spectrum Survival on YouTube. All right, good thing that didn't knock us off. I took the studio page right to a YouTube thing, and that's good that we're still on there. Full Spectrum Survival on YouTube. I'll post the links in the chat room for those of you who wish to pick them up. And the news in 2 minutes we play here every night on our show, courtesy of Full Spectrum Survival, and we thank them so much for their work that they've put into this, as it is not news stories they pick out of a hat. It is an algorithm and a system they use that is on top of things, and they are making waves and able to summarize the most important stories, the trending stories that won't be trending for days, and they do it very well. With that, welcome to have you back, Mike.
Oh, thank you both, Doug and Joe, for having me on tonight. Joe, after we hung up the phone, I had walked into a news brief with Brad where he was covering actually and preparing some of the video that would appear on the news in 2 minutes for tomorrow. And while he was doing so, we were reviewing the heavy sectarian fighting that's really happening throughout the entirety of the Central African Republic, CAR. They are in the throes of an active religious war. Tonight was the first night that the News in 2 Minutes, Full Spectrum Survival, was able to verify without a doubt that there are trained Christians that are actively tracking and engaging in combat with militant Muslim groups over really what amounts to be the very right of survival in the CAR region, which we were shocked to see. We had seen reports, but we have never been able to independently verify them on video, and we were able to do so tonight. That has a lot of implications. It has a lot of implications for the Sudanese and Sudan, and it has a lot of implications throughout the entirety of Africa. If you look at what's happening in Africa, and then you go into Sudan, there are literally compounds filled with evacuating refugees who are trying to flee the violence that's happening after factions within the military tried to overthrow the ruling government. The UN today confirmed that the Indian Army peacekeepers that were there on the ground have been killed in action trying to quell the violence. We have armed militant groups, and in Sudan we have no verification of that they are actually trained Christians or Muslims, but there is some faction of one of the two that has taken control in a number of the country's oil fields, which could have a future impact on the price of gasoline, which as I was sitting on the show waiting to come on, I heard you both speaking about the price of oil, and that can have a dramatic effect coming up here shortly. We have really reports of and these are verified from some independent sources, of complete chaos of the streets. Groups going from house to house, town to town. They're destroying everything within their path. They're looting homes and buildings. We have pastors coming out and saying, I thought I was safe. I'm not. I'm a refugee now. We're seeing just complete and total chaos. Now, when you look at Sudan, a lot of people think, well, I see a lot of reporting from Africa. I see a lot of, they always seem to be in turmoil. And there's a lot of truth to that statement. However, this is the first time that we're seeing Sudan, Chad, and CAR simultaneously agreeing to deploy a joint military force on their respective common borders with the three countries. That's a very, very key point. because once you have the three leaders of those countries agreeing to try and quell the sectarian violence, you have a tinder ready to burst into flames. And I think from all the information that we've been watching happening throughout the ongoing religious war as it relates to believing Muslims and believing Christians in Africa, this is the first time we've seen an escalation on this scale. I think you've seen some countries in NATO actually getting ready to deploy or have already deployed troops on the ground. This has it will have a large and long trending impact on our price of fuel and the overall war between Islam and Christianity throughout the world.
Absolutely. And, from the oil to the unrest that we are seeing, Ukraine has a lot of unrest going on right now? Is that correct? Is it Ukraine?
That's correct.
Yeah,
that is
and there's a few other countries. Yeah, I heard on
a few other countries.
Yeah, a few days ago on your News in 2 Minutes, it talked about, maybe it was even last night or the night before, but it talked about these countries. And, I mean, from the Arab Spring, we see these countries going unrest to Greece for and the European Union nation states that are on the downslide, the unrest that has been going on there. We're seeing, even signs of growing unrest here. People are becoming active, but for all the wrong reasons, it seems, going out and protesting different things here and there, but not to bring people together or for solutions. Rather, it is to pick a fight in many cases. And that's not true for everything, but the majority. And it's sad, how many innocent people have died in the last 3 years from all this unrest, and how much of that unrest was created by the influence of our government.
Right. Now, you pick up you said a very good point. There is a lot of social unrest, and you focused on the Ukraine. If you, from a strategic standpoint, when you're viewing the hotspots of the world and how they can overall affect your life, which is a lot of what I know your mission is in the radio show and all of the investigative journal work you do, and it's one of our core missions. If you take a hotspot, and let's just call it the Ukraine, we put a dot on the map, and then we start to draw concentric circles around it at, let's say, every 500 miles. You can then go and look at what is the stability of the surrounding areas to see what is the statistical probability that unrest can spread past a certain point. And tonight in the Kar region and in Sudan, we have a case where if you put that dot on the map and you start drawing concentric circles, you see a situation that really is the very, very tip of the spear, which could erupt the entire continent of Africa, which has massive global implications. I don't think people realize how heavily invested China is in Africa, or Russia, and what type of what Gazprom's doing, or what the United States wants to do with their political activities in that country. And if you look at all the bits and pieces, we have a lot of the formula for a tipping point. And that's why I was so excited to come on the show tonight. This is heartbreaking, right at the tip of the spear information that I know your viewers come to your site to receive. So I want to be the first to bring it to you, to show you what we're seeing, and then we can start talking about what it's going to look like as this story matures. And it's going to mature in the news cycle. This is the very tip. We don't see them being able to quell this level of violence, especially once they're starting to try and ring it. Similar to the way a team would come in a pandemic. If the CDC came in and landed in an area that was having an outbreak of a disease that was uncontrollable, they would put a dot on the map and draw a concentric circle, and they would ring the environment, and they'd keep everybody in to not spread the disease. Well, what's happening here in the level of violence that we're seeing is that very cancerous disease. And we don't see them being able to hold it back just because of there's economic components. There are religious components. There are ethnic components. Deep-seated animosities between groups in this part of Africa. So it's something we all need to keep an eye on, because in the next days and weeks, it could blow up to be something of an enormous proportion. Now, I'm not saying that it will, but it has all the right ingredients for it to be possible.
Where do you see this going, Mike? How you doing, Doug, here? Where do you see this, if that does happen, how do you see it play out?
I see it affecting the price of oil almost instantaneously. And I also see, right now we've only really witnessed a UN mission and some NATO countries' intervention. It gets a little bit further north on the continent or a little bit more west, and you're definitely going to have China coming in. They have a lot of assets there. They have a lot of interest. They spend a lot of money. We do see this one tinder point as being something that can really start a tipping point. And what we have experienced from a global standpoint is some stability. We have these hot spots that come up like Ukraine. Money gets thrown out of it. Obviously, Germany admitted defeat. Gazprom came in, and Russia, and they saved the day there. We see that cooling down to a certain degree. Of course, unfortunately, still some loss of life, which is not good in any circumstances, but it sure has calmed down from what it was a week ago. This is one that we don't see calming down. We see the buildup of forces. So having it affect the price of oil, having it become much more centric to the news cycle over the next days, weeks, or possibly even months, and really seeing the next thing we're going to be looking for is, are there any other points on the map that we're going to have to put a pin where there's going to be an outbreak, and draw those concentric circles around it to see what type of stability surrounds that area, and can it continue to grow. And Africa, even though I don't think we've ever studied Africa as the tipping point, it is meeting right now at this particular time all those signs for all of the people that are aware, that are listening to the radio, watching your website, to keep an eye on it, because it could be something that gets to be something that's really dominating the news cycle here in the next month.
All right. Let me bump you over to Saudi Arabia. You can see what this country, what this regime, the power brokers here are doing to Saudi Arabia, which I've got no love for the Saudis, believe me. However, the agreement that was struck between the United States and Saudi Arabia. I mean, the CIA basically created the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Aramco, back in the day with the oil and so on. But if we, given the fact that right now our reserves are dwindling, the pipeline is a no-go, so they're, Canada, what are they going to do, or what have they done? They've decided to toss the pipeline west, or to their coast, I should say, and now we're putting a finger in the eye of Saudi Arabia. All of this, combined with what you mentioned, is, I mean, there's a perfect storm here. Storms popping or developing all over the globe.
They are, and you're absolutely right. I mean, Saudi Arabia, you can never dismiss them. There's a lot of propaganda to sort through. I know you've been researching extensively, so your points about how it's going to affect some of the overall tipping point, I think, are probably stronger from your side than mine. Just because there's so much, that's a huge onion to peel back. You've got currently some hostilities, at least that's what they're portraying to the public, between this administration and Saudi Arabia. We both know and watched the fact that they weren't able to ramp Syria like they wanted to. That was an overt ramp to have American involvement there. I'm glad we didn't see that happen, obviously. I think that if I try to break it down in the economic sectors, and I look at what's happening in the natural gas sector, I see we see a huge trend away from oil to nat gas. And I think that a lot of times some of the reporting and some of my thought process is even steeped into, really what type of role some of these Middle Eastern countries played, in their directly pumping oil out of the ground. in barrels. And I think that the nat gas area and where all the growth is, at least from an economic standpoint, is somewhat chewing away at their ability to continue to create that geopolitical overlord structure that they've done in the past. I don't know exactly, again, how that's going to play into Africa. I think that it could come back to them. It could draw attention back to some of the points that you were making about reserves, supplies, what's gone, what is still left here, what's the perception. I mean, from an inflationary standpoint, we both talked off air. You're seeing these huge inflationary spikes in energy, huge inflationary spikes in food. So having that being Saudi-centric from a point of how the news plays out and what's being discussed and them trying to meet their geopolitical ends, I think that's going to be a big part of it. But I don't know exactly how it's going to play into the overall event as it relates to the prices that we pay here.
Okay, all right. Well, that's fair enough. I mean, but back to your point about Africa. What should we be looking for there? Very specifically, if you can tell us, or maybe not specifically. Maybe we should take a couple of steps back. What about Africa? And I'd like to reaffirm what you said before. Perhaps approach us in a different way. What about Africa? What's going on there? I mean, what should we be looking for?
Well, from a sectarian violence ethnic struggle, again, tonight was the first night that we were able to identify on video trained Christian fighters tracking and fighting in the street with militant Muslims. These aren't your fringe Christian groups. These are normal Christian groups in Africa trying to defend their homes. And
okay.
We've never seen that before. We've heard reports of it, but we have never seen it. That there's at least in my viewpoint, there's a tipping point psychologically when you can say, okay, well, we have this faction and that faction. We have a Christian group here fighting a Muslim group here. But when I think a long time ago we spoke on air with you that before it was common knowledge, you knew, Joe knew, and I knew that when you saw the black flag being flown by a group of Muslim extremists, that was Al-Qaeda. Anywhere right. You saw the black flag. It was not prudent in their propaganda structure in the United States for them to let the general public know that. Now I think the general public has somewhat of an awareness of that, thanks to your reporting and our reporting.
Okay.
And it has a great impact. And it has that very symbolism of that black flag has a huge impact on visuals that come out in the open when a political agenda is trying to be pushed. And we believe that same impact, because really that turns you off. You want to intervene in Syria, I mean, you're going to fight alongside of, the whole reason why we're supposedly going through 10 levels of security at an airport to get on an airplane. I mean, it just starts to not make cognitive sense, okay?
Right.
Well, we feel that having identified visually Christian believers fighting for their lives in a group is going to have the level of impact on the human population that the black flag, identifying it with Al-Qaeda in extremist Muslim groups, it's going to have the same overall impact. And once that impact soaks into the general population, because it's undeniable now that people are going to sit back and realize, wow, we really have hit another point. Because before it's always been spoken of in general terms. There's a bad guy, and again, Brad and I don't believe that all Muslims are bad. We don't believe that at all. I mean, people are bad no matter what they are, and they're good no matter what their belief systems are. We don't pin it down like that, but we know when a particular manifesto of a group within a subgroup within an organization is trying to press their will upon, the population at large and form a global caliphate where you and I would no longer be able to hold our Christian beliefs. That's not something we want to see happen, obviously. Right. So having said that, tonight being the first night that we could identify open Christians forming resistance groups and identifying with their Christianity and not in some fringe base, fighting for their very survival. We believe that it takes a lot more analyzation now of how this is going to grow as a news trend and what the actual impact is going to be, not only for the continent of Africa, because they're already pulling out all the stops. They're already trying to take massive mobilization of units to contain the problem. So that's Sudan, Chad, and Central Africa are deploying a joint force across their common border between the three countries to hold in this problem. That's huge, because that means that they know that this problem can spread. So if you take that second concentric circle and you draw it around those three entities, and then you look outside, you see, oh, well, we have all the characteristics of a widespread, what could possibly be a continental war, and that is huge. And as these groups are forming and they start to identify with various religious groups, then that is even more fuel to the fire of the overall scalability of the problem. Because, as you know, when that first bullet starts to fly, if you don't pick a side, you will die. That's a fact. There are no people that walk on a gray line or on a border in a war-torn nation. You pick one side or the other, and you'll live and die by that choice, or you will die by not picking. So knowing that human psychology exists everywhere in the world, whether you're in Africa or whether you're in Central America, no matter where you are, wherever you find yourself, that there's large-scale wholesale war, that is the human psychology that takes hold and that people have to make their choices by. We see it growing from here into something that can be much, much larger. It has everything in it. Now, of course, we don't predict the future, so we have no idea if it will or not, but it has all the right components for it to be widespread violence.
Have you been able to track where the funding is coming from and where the backing is coming from? Does it seem like, because to me, the funding, the backing would be coming from an external source more than likely. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. you know my thoughts on that. I'm going to leave that one to you. And your investigative journalism. But yes, I am sure that if you start to peel this onion back, that there are definitely geopolitical ends that are trying to be achieved here, without a doubt. But even though we've seen them achieved in other places, as you've well documented, but never have we seen all the components, a widespread, possibly continent-wide civil war. Never. And seeing those people identify with Christianity and we're almost sure that it's going to have the same impact to Christians around the world as people seeing the black flag and being able to identify with Muslim extremism. And that's powerful.
Indeed it is. And ladies and gentlemen, please understand the magnitude of what is being said here this evening, because I think now we've gone from the basic rudimentary events and into an escalation that has the potential to involve the entirety of the globe. I suppose when you look at it from a big picture, and when you look at it through that context as well, in the funding of both sides, what's the end game here? And the end game is to cause chaos and to cause. It's a divide and conquer situation, and of course, when you've got two sides within a country or a town or a city, or it doesn't matter. Wherever you've got division, you've got the ability to take over that area and to pick up the pieces after. In this case, after people are being hacked to pieces from both sides. Yeah. So this is okay. So folks, understand the significance and mark this date down here, the day before the winter solstice, the 20th day of December 2013 and understand what's being said here. It's important. Okay.
It really is hugely important. I guess I don't have the exact words to express the enormity of what's happening. And because of all the pieces that exist there in Africa, you know and I know that Africa has been the world powers playground for quite a long time. Unfortunately for the people, the citizens of Africa in their entirety, it has been a playground. You watched Libya happen. You did more reporting on that, more breaking stories than anybody else. You really brought that to the forefront of what was going on. And that's a microcosm of what happens in that continent. But I know from the people that we speak to in our contacts that when you start to openly pick sides and you look at where is the stability going to come from, and if you see all this joint effort from the UN, from the United States, from France, from India, trying to border and contain the situation, that's when the alarm bells start to go off. Because we've just crossed the Rubicon here. And now it's just a matter of how effective can they be in continuing to contain it. Is it, one, going to be containable? Number two, is it going to lower an escalation and then pop up somewhere else in the region and then re-escalate there, which we think is possible? Or number three, are they just not going to be able to contain it at all and have it go widespread? And it just takes a couple of events. And they're very far from our borders, and the reporting there is very scarce. So, you're relying on there are a lot of missionaries there. There are a lot of great Christian people there. I think America, from a biblical standpoint, really focuses on and brings a lot of love and care and the gospel to the people of Africa. And some people from Africa are the strongest, best Christians that I know. And my heart goes out to them tonight because I know that they're fighting for their very survival here, and that's hard to do, no matter what country you're in. So we hope and pray for them that things calm down there, and that doesn't continue to be the case. It's one more reason to show, even though this is Africa, and we might be a little jaded here in the West when we look over there, but it really can happen anywhere.
It sure can. And just one thing it's interesting that you brought this up tonight, and when I was talking earlier about the Rhodes Scholarship, people might not really equate the two subjects necessarily, but you've got to understand who Cecil Rhodes was, and the goals of the world's secret power manipulators, and how Carroll Quigley had couched this in his 1,400-page encyclopedic tome, Tragedy and Hope. Well, and again, Quigley really gets into some deep stuff in his work, but if you look at Cecil Rhodes and John Ruskin, well, okay, John Ruskin preceded Rhodes, and who is Ruskin? Well, if you just look at what Dr. Quigley had to say about him, Ruskin, he was born in London. He was the son of a wine merchant, if I remember correctly, and he's very widely educated, widely traveled. He graduated from Oxford, and so on. But as we look through this Ruskin-Rhodes biography and follow their lives, well, you can see, for example, Ruskin, and in particular Cecil Rhodes, what Rhodes had done in South Africa, and the gold mining in South Africa, and other mining in South Africa, and what he had done to the country of South Africa on behalf of the United Kingdom. I mean, you've got to take a look at this in his plays for the Rothschilds, and now look at the people educated through Rhodes, and look at the situation taking place in Africa, not just the continent of Africa. Well, is there a connection here? And I know that might sound outlandish and conspiratorial to some people, but I believe if you look at the larger picture and start connecting the dots and start connecting some strings between the breadcrumbs between people, and agendas, yeah, I would say that there's a larger agenda at play. So what you're reporting, sir, is very important and I think critical to the overall larger picture of this globalist agenda and how this fits into that larger globalist agenda. Because once everything does break open, and if it happens incrementally or all at once, is the United States going to be in a position to do anything, or are we going to be hamstrung by the lack of military presence, by the lack of fuel, by the lack of economic power? I think we will. Well, who's going to fill that void? Well, it goes right back to Great Britain. But then, once again, that's just a larger picture. I don't know if you want to comment on that or not.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, they've been plundered. I mean, whenever a people or a nation have been stripped of their natural resources for decades and decades, and you have, poverty, and they have, very opposing ethnic standards between the groups, that you have a tinderbox, and it's not as if the plundering has ever really stopped there. So I think that it is the perfect playground. It is a much more manipulative area for the world powers to take the globe to the next level than any other geographic spot on the planet. Because look at what they can get away with there. There's very little in-depth reporting there. They're viewed, which in most places it's not the case, as a third world country. It's somewhat looked down upon by the press. At least that's the feeling I get when I read the reports. When all of the people that I've met there that have come here, it's a very rich environment. There's a lot of history there. Obviously, it dates back to the dawn of civilization from an archaeological standpoint. What better area to be manipulated than the continent of Africa? What better area for them to start something that draws everyone in? We've always been Middle East focused. I quite frankly think a lot of things they've tried to accomplish in the Middle East haven't worked. They've been somewhat unsuccessful due to the fact that the missions don't always align there. I mean, the Middle East is obviously headed towards a global caliphate. That's what is trying to be formed there. And I don't know how penetrable that bind that very topic holds to them, lets the world powers manipulate them. Where if we go over to another nation such as Africa, and we see what can be manipulated from a geopolitical standpoint, from a resource standpoint, from a sectarian standpoint, that's a very fertile breeding ground. Now we know, you go up towards the top, and you are over in the Middle East, but it's an area that I think that we ignore. That now that we've seen some lines being crossed, we should definitely start to pay attention to. I don't think you can go back at this point and heal any of the things that you brought up. Yet they are very evidently true. But I think we need to watch it, and we need to find out, using some very simple tactics, like when you see an area that gets hot, go to the map, put a pen in it, and start drawing, circles around it, and see how far can this go, and what other countries are intervening in it. And we'll see, do these wane, or do they continue to escalate? Do they hold the same level of escalation through events, or do they pick right back off where they were? And I think you were the one who pointed out, or Joe pointed out, in a conversation with Brad, that yet the Ukraine calmed down for 48 or 72 hours, and so did Thailand. They picked up, both of them, with the same level of severity immediately when it got heated up again, which is different than what we've seen happen in the past probably 5 or 6 years of social unrest. In the past 5 or 6 years of social unrest, since at least 2008, we've seen it flare up, and then we see it flare down. And if it does flare up again in a particular area, it never generally hits the same intensity that it did originally. Well, that hasn't been the trend. That's surely not the trend for the past 4 months, and you pointed, back out to us. So Thailand can flare up as hot as it did, a year ago in just a matter of days, and the Ukraine can be quiet, and, it seems like the economic help is there. Putin is definitely, putting his foot down. And then you look at Sudan. I think we're going to see that even if it does de-escalate, when it flares up again, it's going to have the same intensity, which gradually kind of, the frog in the boiling water theory we've always talked about. That's kind of what you're getting here, yet the events aren't all attached. The severity of them all, we've just come to accept it because it's calmed down and then it reignites, but it doesn't seem as bad as it was beforehand, but yet the world is just an entirely different place there.
I don't think this is going to be a replay of Black Hawk Down. I think it's going to be much worse. Some people, I've seen some references to that, and of course, we understand what that was about. But I think what we're seeing is going to be much worse than anything. I have a tendency to agree with you. I think that we've broken through this whatever glass ceiling there might have been, or whatever you want to call it, and entered into a new phase now. Wow. Oof. So
yeah, we really have broken into a new phase. Now, a cognitive dissonance, which we all experience at some level, prevents us from seeing clearly that things have escalated enormously. But if you look back even to past news articles, one quick read and you realize, wow, we're far from there. Just
right.
Going back to some of your old shows, which we've done, we're miles and miles and miles ahead, and yet we're all talking around looking for this large event, and it is 30% worse than it was a year ago.
Exactly. And let me just plug, while you're saying this, folks, this is the reason why I urge everybody to bookmark fullspectrumsurvival.com, and this is why we are so honored to be able to broadcast the News in 2 Minutes segment, because if you go back in time and just look at the bits and pieces, the news, the items that were selected in broadcast, you will see that what was said a month, 2 months ago is being reported on now by the media, but you'll also identify the trends, as Mr. Harris here is talking about, as well, becoming trending today, whereas the corporate media, the managed media has failed to, whether through incompetence or lack of desire or lack of allowance to report. So we're so glad to have this union between, or this cooperative agreement between Full Spectrum Survival News in 2 Minutes and the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. I just want to throw that plug in there for people, new listeners who aren't familiar with the fact that we're
and the unrest stories. I saw maybe one article from BBC and maybe RT ran another one, but day 2 of Duck Dynasty shenanigans in the news.
Right.
There are things happening. People are dying all across the world, not from natural causes, from things that are happening, things that are being done to them. But we don't hear about the unrest there. We don't hear about the American media is so filtered, and with them they say that they outlawed propaganda, then they brought it back. They never outlawed it,
Right.
As that Paul Harvey said in If I Were the Devil clip, and he talks about how to get this culture to where it is, and he's talking from 1963 or 1965 about the future, what he sees. Soon you'll need metal detectors in schools, and you'll take the incentive away from children, and the beauty away from art, and all these things he lists that have the prisons will be overflowed, and all these things that have come to pass. And he in there's a quote, and you'll have the media fanning the flames, and that's what they do. That is their goal, not to report the news, but to hype it up,
to control it.
Right, and to get an emotional response.
what you said is absolutely true. And you can start your critical analysis just in your local 6 o'clock news. There is a speech pattern that they all use. As soon as your mind identifies their speech pattern, you see what's really happening and how they're delivering the message. And, I ask everybody, if you question it, just go listen to them all, and you will hear the pattern of speech. It's not because they're emulating people. It's because they're delivering a message in a way that they're taught to deliver it. And what that ends up doing psychologically to someone is it makes someone walk away saying, ooh, the news was bad, but they feel as though they know of every death that happened in their local environment, every robbery, every car accident, every murder, every type of illness. And it's done that way. Put on a police radio scanner. I challenge anyone, go on the Internet, put on a police radio scanner for your local area, and then compare that to your nightly news, and you'll be shocked. Because what's really happening in I'm sorry.
You're so right.
This is neuralistic programming.
Neuralistic
programming.
Some maybe one or two, on the local TV primetime news stations. You'll get one or two stories of some violence that happened. You'll get a couple car accidents, and then, an animal was saved from the animal shelter today. I mean, just these stories that are not significant at all, have no value, no purpose other than to fill space. Literally.
It's to lull you.
Right. And what you're talking about, though, I think it's even deeper than that. Again, I just want to, folks, please research neurolinguistic programming, because this is what we're seeing happen, especially on the national level, the syndicated national level shows, and especially those where there is talk back and forth, interviews back and forth with people, whether it's Sean Hannity or whether it's Rachel Maddow, whether it's Rush Limbaugh or Bill O'Reilly, or whether it's I don't know, Chris Matthews or whatever else is on the other side. It doesn't matter. Both sides use this type of programming, and it is extremely effective. And it goes into the go ahead. Sorry.
It sure is. From a statecraft perspective, we should do a show, because you can break down any major article that they want to leave the reader neutral. It's a series of steps you take in the writing process. It's confirm, deny, place doubt, confirm, and deny. It's you can almost match every article to that same. So someone walks away and they are completely gray because of what was just done to their mind. They confirm the story, they denied the story in the next paragraph. Then they place doubt, then they reconfirm the story. It's so predictable that unfortunately it just works so well. And until you understand the patterns, you walk away gray. You walk away, well, I don't know how I feel about that. Well, that was on purpose. They don't want you to feel.
And the beautiful part of, folks, here's my sales pitch again. The beautiful part of News in 2 Minutes and Full Spectrum Survival is the fact that they recognize that, and they break that mold, and they present the information to you without that, without the programming involved. It's the hardcore facts, and it's done with as much information packed into such a short amount of time as possible. And it gives you the facts. And you walk away from it knowledgeable, not influenced. And there's a big difference.
That's for sure. And, we rely on you and both of yours investigative journalism, because that is a specialty in and of itself. That's why we're so excited about the relationship. We have to walk away in our format and go to the next day, which we go back to you to listen to see, how far are you peeling back the onion? We know you know all the neurolinguistic steps. We know you understand the propaganda machine, why it's doing it, how it's doing it. So we rely on you back, because some of these key points, I'm drawing attention to Africa. In the next few minutes, I'm going to draw attention to Texas, which are two of the hottest points. And a lot of times where we are like, I know Brad is sitting over there waiting for a genetic sequence to come out from a Texas hospital, because if it comes out the way it might come out, there could be some larger problems that we've seen some hints to in alternative media, but we haven't been able to confirm it. And, it's not, we have to be just like you do. We have to be responsible in what we report, and we have to be responsible in what we say. So a lot of times that means that there's something that's noticed out there in alternative media that we have to wait for, just to make sure that your large viewer base, our large viewer base, is getting something confirmed. In Africa tonight, we can without a doubt have seen it with our own two eyes on video, understand the significance. We can report on it, talk about it, analyze it, massage it. And in Texas, we just can't do that yet. But we think that there's a possibility that something very large there could be happening. But we really rely on you and Joe to come in and to really peel the layers of the onions back. Because it means a lot to us, because then we can go in and we can see it a little bit different, and we see, where's this trend going? Was it deeper than we thought? Were the geopolitical ramifications of, what's happening in Sudan? We haven't gone that to see exactly, what the end goal is there. Is it for a wider spread conflict? Is it something that's outside of their wheelhouse? Are they out of control there? We don't know, and we're sure interested in finding out.
Well, we're going to keep an eye on this in a big way, and until we find out what's really taking place in Texas, we're going to reserve comment on that, and we'll share information as best we can. But I've got to tell you, I don't have a good feeling about things here in the States, and in particular with Texas, with respect to what's going on there. But indeed, the African situation. Is this a template for a globalist or a global, a larger scale operation? Is that a microcosm of what is to come? I do suspect that's that's indeed part of it, and I think that it could very well be a foundation being set, and also as well to see. Let me even say this. Isn't it funny how little, and you mentioned this earlier, how little comes out of Africa? That gives people the time that are pulling the strings enough time to do whatever they do with their experiments and their agendas, and to see the actions and reactions, and then of course they could apply it depending on the outcome on a larger level or a wider scale. And I think that's what we're seeing. I don't know if I made sense on that, but that's kind of what I think.
So. It's the petri dish. It's the playground. That's why it bears watching.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Mr. Harris, we're at the top of the hour. I just want to say thank you so very much for a wonderful product, for spending some time with us tonight about this, just about the issues at hand. And I think it's kind of frightening, actually, but it's better. Knowledge does replace fear in many cases. So if we're prepared for this, we're in a much better vantage position, much better preparation stage than ordinarily. So I want to thank you so much for your time tonight, and thank you for a great product, wonderful product, the best out there, best news product out there. You've outdone yourselves.
Thank you so much, and as soon as Brad gets the sequencing, I'll make sure to pass it over your way. And
appreciate
thank you both
that.
for having me on, and thank you for all you do. And I want to thank your listeners, all the listeners. I know I've been on before, but I want to thank them for everyone who contributed for our community effort to produce the DVD Survival Series. We're filming day and night, literally. So I want to thank everybody again, all of you listeners who contributed. We can't wait to get the product out.
Oh, we can't wait to have it. Mike, thank you so very much. God bless you. If we don't talk to you before, have a Merry Christmas. We really appreciate your time.
You too, Joe. Thank you. God bless you all.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Folks, that was Michael Harris from FullSpectrumSurvival.com. FullSpectrumSurvival.com. News in 2 minutes. Bookmark that. Look, I tell you what, I check it every morning, frankly, or check it every day. 2 minutes, know what's going on. I got a little notepad. I write down the high points, and I do use that as a springboard for my investigative research for the day. And I do suggest you all do the same as well, regardless of what part of the world you're in. And I know we have listeners all over the world, and that's what we need to do. If all goes well, and I do hope it does. On the other side of the hour, on the other side of the break, we're going to have my intelligence source call in and give us more information about what we were talking about at the beginning of the program. And I just want to alert you to that. So if everything goes well, that's what's going to happen. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this, the 20th day of December, 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann. Gentlemen, hour number 3 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. We are just going to fly. We're rolling right along here. We've got a very busy third hour. Before we get into our next guest, I just want to say this. I want to acknowledge Rick and Darlene L., who write, please, on your Monday show with Pastor Langford and Steve Quayle, can we have as part of our prayer time a special prayer for all of God's people who are struggling financially? In references to a woman who called in last night to the show asking about people who are struggling and cannot prepare. And Rick and Darlene mentioned this. I thought of all the listening can pray for God to release financial blessing on His children everywhere, and that is so true. The evil one has stepped up his job to against those of us who are in the fight, and how true is that? So we're going to have a very, very special show on Monday. The second thing I want to acknowledge an email sent by Brian M. And the subject line is, your show tonight. Greetings. I think you were wrong about Islam. This is a case of the tail wagging the dog. And he writes, Islam was around long before these so-called kings of Europe were even thought of. He writes, Islam 620 A.D., Dark Ages 1500 A.D., Lenin 1900 A.D. Please get the picture. They are not the tool. They are using tools. My answer to that, and this is the prevailing, pervasive problem among people today, you are not getting the big picture. The big picture. Please understand, this lie, the lie in which we find ourselves today, was not started in 620. It was not started in 330 AD. It was started in the garden. If you understand the agenda of the evil one, the Cain lineage, and how the seed, how the lie has progressed, even before the garden, if you want to perhaps get into that discussion. But understand the lie is bigger. The lie is bigger. You're not thinking big enough. If there's one thing I learned from the man who I'm going to bring on right now, and I'm not going to identify him by name, he's just a man who, folks, you've got to listen to. But if there's one thing I learned from him is, you've got to think bigger. You're not thinking big enough. With that, I'm going to bring on my good friend, a very good friend of the show. I'm not going to name him. We're not going to identify him. I'm going to bring him on right now. He's just a very plugged in, cued in source and a good friend of mine. I would trust. There are very few people I say that I would trust my life with. He's one of them. And I'll just leave it at that. I'm going to bring him on right now. As I look at Joe. All right. I don't know if you got that introduction, my friend, but you're on.
All right. Well, it's good to talk with both of you. Let me just send a kudos out to Michael Harris, his partner. They're doing the Lord's work. They're doing tremendous work. I really do like the News in 2 Minutes. I was a bit skeptical when you were first discussing it, but I think they've done a fantastic job. I have high hopes that will become almost like maybe what Drudge Report did in changing the way that people go looking for their news or get the news. And we're used to bullets or sound bites, and most of those are commentary, and it is difficult because you have to wade through to find the true facts as opposed to what's just commentary, what we're told to know about the news as opposed to what we need to know. And what these guys are doing is really providing us with the core information that we need so we can pay attention in the right direction. So I really think that they're doing very, very important work. We need to pay attention to that, and I think it's fantastic that they chose your listeners to go to first with that. So beyond that, let me just add one other thing, Doug. We didn't talk about it when we talked a little bit ago, and this was kind of off the cuff, but somebody asked me a while back if I had taken any questions from any of the audience, and I'm not really into getting on the phone with anybody. The questions become things I really don't necessarily want to talk about or address, or can take us off point. And so if anybody has something that they really want to ask a question about, or if they listen to that I had said previously and they have a question or want to add into it, you want to put it into the chat there. And if you see something, Doug or Joe, that you think is something that would stay on the flow and add to it, I'm more than glad to answer a couple of questions. Not that I'm avoiding, it's just we have so many important things, and it's we have a brief period of time to do it. And so if you see something there, maybe answer 2 or 3 questions before we end it up, wrap it up. The concern I have right now today, we have so many things pulling on us from so many different directions, and it's hard to know where to put our attentions and what things are going to affect us personally, each and every one of us, most significantly. And I thought it was interesting when you were playing Paul Harvey just a second ago, and I thought about the very first time that I ever heard Paul Harvey. And I was in Shelby, Montana, flyover country. We were right in the middle of the negotiations to put missile basing, MX missiles, up in that part of the world. And so in the course of that, I went into town a number of times, had friends there, and we went to a restaurant that was a local little restaurant in Shelby, Montana. I hope you have some listeners out there, the great folks up there. But it was very homey. It was, for me, a city kid, the smallest town I think I'd ever actually been in my entire life. If not the smallest that I had stayed and interacted for any period of time in. And in the restaurant, when I came in, they had a table, and it's kind of a big round table, and in the middle of the table they had a Lazy Susan. And a Lazy Susan's kind of on ball bearings that can roll around, and stuff gets put in there, and you grab pieces off of it or whatever, and it was kind of a morning breakfast thing. And so literally she'd come out and put eggs and bacon and the various stuff right in the middle of the Lazy Susan. You just roll the thing around, put some on your plate, and sit at the table. And there was about, I recall, 10 or 12 seats. And so you had the farmer, the car dealer, the guy that ran the pharmacy who was a friend of mine. You had the business people from town, and you had just people that worked there in town that were all there at the table. And we sat there, and over the course of an hour, having a cup of coffee, people'd come, people'd go, but we'd have all those people coming in there, and that was a daily routine for them. If you didn't come into town, even if it was just to have a cup of coffee and visit for a minute or two in the course of running your errands, the day wasn't complete. And what you did was you found out what everybody was paying attention to or what was a concern. And the farmer would talk about soybean prices, or he'd talk about fuel prices, and the car mechanic guy had talked about what's going on with the car that's coming out from Ford or one that he's having a problem with. And if you weren't there during the entire time, it didn't matter, because some of the people were there when so-and-so was there earlier, and he told you what that guy said, or 2 guys removed. Maybe the guy was in at 6 and you were in at 8. And anybody see Harvey? Oh, yeah. Well, what do you have to say? Well, he says such and so, but he'll be over such and so later in the day. And what happened was that sense of community and communication allowed for all those people to work together. If you didn't know if so-and-so was going to be available at the shop that day to work on your tractor, somebody at the table, well, I know he's got so-and-so's rig in, and he's going to be tied up most of the day, but he said he was getting kind of wide open for tomorrow or the next day. Oh, okay, well, I can give him a call, and I'll go over and see him tomorrow, or I can plan my stuff. That little teeny bits of communication in little sound bites and over the course of days and weeks and months, allowed people to work together in community and to pay attention and to know what they needed to know and kind of slough off what they didn't need to know. And it was very personal. And that's what you have in your program. You have a location where a lot of people can come to, kind of feel like they're family, communicate some bits and pieces that are relevant, leave some pieces for other people. If somebody didn't hear every show every night, they can pick up, usually get what they need to know over the course of a few days. And you've got your articles. It's a community that has been created that didn't exist just a few years ago. And it's a go-to place. And a lot of those places don't exist that did exist years ago. And I went back to Shelby, Montana about a decade ago, and none of what I remembered was there anymore. It wasn't quite the same. And those areas of communication, those schedules looked to me like they had somewhat broken down. But you could go all over the country 30, 40 years ago, and it was that way all across the country, even in some of the fringes of the larger cities. It's not the same way today. So where can we go? And your program has become one of those nexus points that we people in our type of a community mindset can go and get community information that's relevant to us with the way that we think, the kind of people we are. And I think that's really important. I think that makes your program a hinge point for me and for others like us every day.
Sorry, my button got stuck there. Yeah, well, thank you. Seriously, it did. Well,
I hope your listeners feel the same way. I hope your listeners feel the same way. I think they do. But I think it's important. It bears repeating, and it's important for people to kind of put what they're hearing in context. They need to start thinking like a community if they're not already, and think even more so like a community, because what the problem is, what's ahead for us as a country. And the reason that I say this with, I don't know if I would say it with authority, but I say it with conviction. When you go to countries where things are breaking down within the political infrastructure, within the financial infrastructure, then it falls back to community, the people who live on your block, the people closest to you, your closest relatives. What we're facing, what's just ahead for us, in my opinion, is something that has been projected, has been scheduled for us for about 2 decades that I'm aware of. And I remember the conversation where I first became aware of it. It was with Larry Abraham, who wrote None Dare Call It Conspiracy with Gary Allen, and then wrote later Call It Conspiracy. A great guy, outstanding guy, very close personal friend, and he was pointing out at the time that in the CFR papers, Council Foreign Relations articles, they were talking about breaking the country up into trade zones or regions for the purposes of trade, of course, and and getting the states to align together in packs or groups based on what area of the world they were going to be trading with, somewhat to the exclusion of everybody else, and each one was going to be pointed in a different direction. And Larry pointed out very astutely that ultimately what they were really wanting to do was to conquer by dividing, by getting each of the groups of states locked into a particular trading partner somewhat to the exclusion of the other states adjacent to it. It would put somewhat of a competition in there that would make it difficult for them to work together, and literally balkanizing into self-interest groups of states working against other states. Well, it's somewhat like the red and blue thing almost, and some of the tax policies and things like that. So, I mean, not that it's never existed before. In fact, that's part of the genius of the United States. If you were in a state that wasn't favorable to you or the way you function, you'd go to another state next door. You didn't want to, but if you had to, you had options. But this is something different. This is about really dividing us up. That was what Larry was seeing. Now we come to the current day, the current hour. And what's occurring right now? What our country is held together by somewhat in this centralized society that we have based on a federal system, associated around this federal system, is our currency. Our currency is the single most centralizing aspect of our country. And if the currency collapses, if the currency isn't able to be traded across the country and buy the things that people need, then the government can't do the things it wants to do. It can't project power, not just across the world, but around the country too. And so much of what's going on in our country right now is orchestrated, directed, forced by the federal government, by the way that their dollars come out of Washington, D.C. If the dollars won't buy what they would before, even if they print, 10 times as many, 100 times as many, if you can't buy what you want out of Washington, then suddenly the states are without that propulsion, that power that comes out of Washington, and they're going to become somewhat listless in a political sense and lose momentum. At that point, the control or power is going to go from a federal centralized system to a more local or state system. And even there at the state level, if the money won't buy what you need it to buy, you're not going to be able to force people to do things you want them to do or cajole them or entice them. Now, power don't like to give up power. They don't want to walk away from it easily. So what would the federal government do to maintain control of the states and the people if their money becomes less valuable? Well, they have to force them to comply. And, like Mao said, all power emanates from the muzzle of a gun. So that means that they have to try to extend their power some other way to force us to do what they want us to do. And I think that what we're seeing, what we're worrying about, what we're hand-wringing about is just exactly that. We see a moment, we can feel it coming, when the Ponzi scheme is about to be up here on the Federal Reserve, and not by accident but by design. And they have a plan, and their plan is to force us to go the direction they want us to go to achieve their ends. So then my next question becomes, while we're all sitting here around the table, around the Franken Lazy Susan, and having breakfast and coffee and visiting, let's think about what's just ahead before we go out and do the rest of our day. So,
good idea. If
the federal government can't function the way they want to, and they want to force it, to what end? Why? What is it they are trying to force? Or more importantly, who's trying to force it? Because now we come back to what I think is more critical in this whole conversation, and that is, who really is running the United States of America? If you listen to that comment that you referred to with Bill Clinton, he was responding to people's inquiries about, things that were going on, and he's saying, well, if there is a secret government, I'm not in charge of it. He didn't say it didn't exist. He didn't say that he didn't know if it existed or not. He just said, if there is, I'm not in charge of it. Well, what's the meaning of is? He's parsing words.
Exactly.
He wasn't lying to you. And so then we ask other questions. For example, your show last night. Who's got the football? Lucy? I mean, thinking of Lucy and Linus. Lucy always pulls the football just as he gets ready to kick the football. Well, seems like we've been in that situation before, but really, who's got the football? If that's the question.
And I've gotten some emails
it?
about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've gotten emails about that very same. I mean, asking that very same question: who does have the football, in both metaphorically and in actuality?
Well, and let's go back. If you remember the first conversation I went ahead and did with your listeners and you, problem when the Russian sub was off the coast of Hawaii and tried to launch a nuke on Hawaii.
And that was March of 1968.
Yes. Who was it that actually was orchestrating that? Was it the real leadership, the visible leadership in Russia that was doing that? No. It was people behind the scenes pulling their strings. A handful who were really running things inside the Soviet Union. So then you come forward, and what was my concern when we talked? I said, and the question is, are we in a similar situation here? Because what was the context of even coming on the air in the first place? We were talking about the nuclear weapons that had been transiting through Diaz Air Force Base, and that were proper protocols were not being followed. Correct. And so who could make something like that happen? Who has the power to bypass proper protocols in the handling and movement of nuclear weapons in our country? But that's what the Soviets had the same problem with. So when you have listeners that are talking about we got to get a different Republican in there, we got to get a better Republican in there, those Democrat jerks, they're just horrible. I say to all of your listeners, this isn't just a problem of those individual people. And it isn't just a problem inside the United States. And it goes to the answer you gave to your listener at the opening of this hour. He's not thinking big enough. When you think about criminal organizations, a criminal society, a mob society, thinking about long before this election, I used to tell people before this president came into office in the first place as well, the Chicago mob versus the New York mob. That was what that first election was about. And in the course of our lead up to the election, the two mobs showed up where? At a Bilderberg meeting in Maryland.
That's right.
And all the players showed up, and the one group made its case that it should be Hillary, it should be the Democratic candidate, and the other group made its case that it should be Obama. And then, even though the group itself voted on it, there was also it was a non-binding vote, and then the real leadership of the little cabal did their own little private vote, and then voila, what did we get? We got the candidate that they decided that we needed in order for them to accomplish their purposes in the coming election. And you thought you did it with the primaries. But they had their own little cabal and made the decision. And then that was it. So what we're looking at was people that could pull the strings, pull in all these powerful, powerful people Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and all of their crew. See, the president, he's just the figurehead at the front of a very large group of people pursuing their interests. That's why everybody gets behind a particular guy, because he's going to forward their interests. And there was obviously a difference of interests because the crowd that was forwarding Obama, they had maybe similar to the 99th percentile. But with some variations, they were going to benefit better if he became president than they were if Clinton's people became president. And so there was a contest, literally, the New York mob versus the Chicago mob.
Right.
It ain't so. So then you go, well, if they're that big and they can decide what we're going to get here, can they decide at other places? And if they can decide at other places, how many other places and how big? And I would stipulate to your audience that this is the moment to take a deep breath, think about this with all the clarity of mind you can muster. The issue here, as they've presented it to us for several decades now, is that they are on a path to create a new world order, not a new United States order, not a new United Europe order, not a new United South America order, or Africa, or anywhere else. And so they've had not just decades, not just centuries, but they've been on this path for millennia. And they're not just a loose group of people with business interests. I would stipulate to your audience tonight that they consider prayerfully whether or not what they're really looking at is the biggest mob family on the planet, working in concert, orchestrating their efforts against anybody who's not their blood or who hasn't the ring. Because if you're saying this is evil, well, there's one father of darkness. There's one devil. If he has different groups that are doing evil or doing wrong or injustice, are they at cross purposes or are they somewhat orchestrated? He's not divided. He gets it. He's working towards a particular end. And all those Occupy arms, reaching and stretching and doing and twisting, may look like they're doing their own thing, but in reality they're working together to pull food to their mouth. And when we see things through a glass darkly, as though they're disconnected, and only look at that macroscopic level, we probably do a disservice to ourselves. If you step back and look at the bigger picture, so many of these events that look like they're completely separate, something going on in China and Asia as being completely disconnected from something going on in North Africa, being disconnected from something going on in the Mideast, being disconnected from us here, the reality is most of the time that is not the case at all. They're directly related because we're being played. They're playing orchestra music. One thing leads to the next. They're looking at this whole thing and they're working together. And that's why the interconnectedness of all of these people, the centralization that they have already achieved, allows them to work with a single mind as they bring all these events together so that they, in a syncopated manner, in a coordinated manner, can bring the world to a worldwide crisis of their creation with the mindset that on the other side of that crisis, they're in charge,
with a new world order. They don't tear everything down and force their people into positions of authority and force themselves to the top. What they're going to do is they have orchestrated things to come off the rails with precision so that at the critical moment, as it collapses, they can walk into the vacuum with answers, ready to go. They've already anticipated most of the things that you're going to be surprised by and your audience is going to be surprised by because they've orchestrated the plan. And so they can seamlessly walk in as soon as the dust begins to settle because they already knew what was going to happen before it happened because they made it happen. When you look at that list of the companies that control the flow of money on the planet and how small that number is, hundreds of thousands of companies, millions upon billions of workers, and it comes down to 147 core companies running the world. And of those 147 core companies, less than 20 financial groups in charge of all of them. They got the money, they've got the control, and they're bringing us to this moment of crisis because that's their plan. And when you look at Washington, and you remember what I said I don't actually have any great animosity towards President Obama. I'm frustrated at the things that are happening by and through his office and his presence in that office, and I'm frustrated that we have not had a single real opportunity to vet him for that job. But the other side of the coin is I also know that he's almost more of a slave than any other person on this planet. He's somebody else's talking head. He's somebody else's teleprompter reader. He looks good because that's what he's hired to do. He's not making those decisions. That's why he didn't have to be present on the night when Benghazi happened. Why? Because not needed. He wasn't present any of the nights, other than if he had to put, the right suit on and say the right words and read the teleprompter correctly. Because somebody else is making those decisions for him. He's just following instructions. Yep. And so many of the people that we see as being in charge, no, they're just following a program that was laid out for him that they agreed to do before he ever became president. Somebody else made the decision, okay, then we're going to push him. For what purposes? To what end? They've told you, for a new world order. And a new world order is not in favor, not just of the United States, any other country, because they want to destroy national boundaries, nationalism, personal, anything that is personal. Why? Because they see us as automatons, as really not just a prison planet, but as a slave planet. And they're the masters. And what would allow them mentally to think of us in that way? Because they see themselves as something different than what we are. They look at us as inferior. That's why you have kings and queens. That's why you have princes of the financial world that are crowned for whatever purposes they want to do, people and families that end up getting into those offices, and like Geithner, the only man in the world that could save us that has the capability. What are you talking about? That's the stupidest statement I've ever heard in my whole life, unless, of course, it's because within the family that he comes from and the group that he's tied to, he will do precisely what that group intends to have done for their personal interests. I mean, he's exactly the right guy. And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about people that believe that by blood, by birth, they are superior to anybody that's not in their family, because they are a mob family. This is a mob game on a global scale. And the blood oath that gets you in the family, hey, nobody can be a made guy unless what? Unless he actually is that particular nationality.
Right.
You can't become it. Well, it's not just a nationality in this case, it's a bloodline.
And that's where people aren't thinking big enough. It's a bloodline, and that's the key here. It's about the blood.
It's a global mob family, and and it goes back. I would say to your listeners that they prayerfully need to consider, is what we're talking about, what you mentioned a minute ago, literally the family of Cain. The family of Cain, a bloodline that is diffused out into the world, and by how pure your blood is determines whether or not you get a particular spot. Why? Because it's a mob family. And when you're thinking, well, but they don't look like that guy, or, this guy looks Asian, and that guy looks like he's from Australia, and he's a white guy, and, that other guy looks Nordic or whatever, it's like in the James Bond movie when the bad guy is there in the chair and Bond has just got him in to interrogate him, and the bad guy says, you don't even know who we are. Your questions tell me, we worry about whether or not, you listen in our phone calls, but you don't even know who we are. You don't even know we exist. You don't even realize that we're everywhere. And he looks over at the bodyguard, and he says, do they? Am I right? And the guy launches off and starts firing at him. This is the person that they trusted that was closest to everybody. And they had no idea. All those years, all those security clearances. Well, it's the same thing here. If you're not looking at it the right way, you don't realize that there's a blood tie, and the blood is thicker than water, and that's how they see it. And so, it's like when we talked about the presidency. Well, the closer you are to the bloodline there in London, that's the guy that gets elected in the next elections, what people have talked about, being the real thing that you question to elections, who's going to win. Well, you had a U.S. citizen, and you had a person whose dad was under the British Crown who won. So, people can mince over, they can argue over whatever, but I'm just telling you that I believe that that's a core piece of what we have to look at. The other interesting things that I think fall within that same thing, and then if there's a couple questions, I'll answer questions if you have anything, but is we have to look also, Christ cursed the money changers and overturned the table and called them a den of vipers. And I thought that was interesting when I saw that. It never clicked in my brain until just a few weeks ago. But, vipers, snakes, well, that's the reptilians. And one of the things that they talk about is, being the reptilians. The reptilians being what? The seed of Satan, the seed of the serpent. See, I just had a very in-depth conversation a few weeks ago with a group of Jewish scholars, Kabbalistic questions, and we were talking about, was Cain the offseed of Satan? Is that the fruit of which Eve ate? And I didn't think that they would think that way, as I was explaining from a biblical standpoint why that had been my understanding and belief for several decades. And I was surprised to find that these scholars who were no riffraff had come to the same conclusions and had plenty of writing that said that verified where they were coming from and then matched what they were seeing also. So if you go, well, then Cain was offseed of Satan because Eve was beguiled. And so now you have a bloodline of Cain and a bloodline of Adam, of Seth, Adam's second after Abel was killed. Well, where did Cain go? Cain went to a faraway city after he was sent away from the family. And there he took for himself a bride. Well, where did those people come from? There was other humanoids on the planet, but they weren't human, direct descendants of Adam. That's why there's two bloodlines identified in Genesis, the bloodline of Cain and the bloodline of Adam through Seth. And that is what this whole thing is about. You know why Cain had to be sent away? Because after he got through killing Abel, if he turned and killed his father, there would be no other bloodline other than this hybrid, other humanoids, Satan line, and there would be no opportunity for God to bless Adam as he had promised to do. And God's word would have been void. It would have been all over. God had promised Adam that he and his seed would inherit the earth. And yet if Adam died and Seth was dead, it wouldn't be his seed only. His seed would inherit it through Eve or the humanoid type, but it would also be the satanic line that had been cursed. And part of the problem is I think that people think of Satan, of Lucifer, as being only angelic in the sense of some ethereal, nefarious whatever. And in reality, he's more flesh and blood than they first understood. There was some prior human or humanoid dispensation here on the planet that's these prior histories, these prior civilizations, these Atlantean and before that civilizations that were not the line that was God had chosen to bless. That's why he planted Adam and Eve in the garden and started civilization again there to displace that generation that wouldn't give him the glory. And so with that in mind, even if your listeners question if I know what I'm talking about or that makes sense or that it's right, forget what we think for a second, because it really doesn't matter. I'd love to discuss it. We could talk for hours on it. I spent 14 hours talking with the Jewish scholars and all the minutiae on this. And by the way, for those who may not know it, yeah, and for those who don't know it, and I've had the same discussion with Islamics, and you know that, Doug, that I have very close friends there, and we've had very similar discussions, amazing discussions, tremendous scholars that I have great respect for personally, good guys. So I'm not just falling in one camp or the other for the purposes of trying to understand this prior history, but all of that is meaningless because it's not about what we believe. It's about what this group, who is now trying to take over control of the whole world, believes. They believe that they are the descendants of Cain. They believe it's them against us. And the only way to protect themselves, to protect their way of life, is to get rid of us. And if they get rid of us, they win. That's what this is all about. And this is that moment when they believe that they can bring the population of the world down to a much smaller number, cull the herd, have it be more of them than us, and eventually move us off the planet and take over. And if you think about it, what happened at the time of Noah? There was a moment when, what did it say about Noah? Noah alone was perfect. Go look at the scripture. Noah alone was perfect, without sin, in all of his generations. That's important. It doesn't say he never did anything wrong. In fact, in the verses just before and after, it talks about stuff he did where he made a boo-boo and then sinned against God. It's about that he wasn't commingled, a hybrid with some of the other Cain seed. That he was a perfect, pure blood descendant of Adam. These folks have it in their mind that it is them against us and they're superior to us. And so they're managing their people in positions of power and those that will kiss up to them. They don't have to be pure blood, but they've got people that want to be in their camp. Like any mob group, there's people that are made men because they're, Sicilian, they can be in the family. And then there's those that can be associates and work with them, but they'll never be a made man because they're not blood. We're looking at a political, banking, business, mob family that's working us. And if you don't get that in your mind, you are just going to be churned up, sent into the plastic shredder, and these people are going to take over. And until you start thinking like an American, thinking like a community, thinking like citizens together, they're going to work you against each other until you're gone. And that's what this is all about.
Wonderful summation. The wonderful summation.
I can tell you this.
That.
I can just tell you this. I had a person who at the time was probably, arguably, the wealthiest man on the planet. When I was very young, and he'd been through it all. And he said, and you know who this is, and he said this is what he had come to understand in his life. This was the sum of all that he understood in all of his life, and he realized, oh my God, everything that seemed disconnected, all the people that were working against him, he was on the outside. That's why he was struggling so hard at various times. He was trying to do important, good stuff. And he realized at a certain point, the reason it's not going to work is you're not one of the insiders. You're not blood. That's what we have to understand. This is a real battle. And these people have we didn't ask for this conflict. We didn't ask to be put in this position. Like Lincoln said, the war is thrust upon us, but we will not shrink from our duty. This is that moment when we have to take a deep breath, understand what really is going on here, stop mincing words, and stop pretending that, well, it might be, I don't know. All you got to know is there's a coordinated family effort. Whether it's really real that they're blood or they just decided that, there is private groups, private cabals, there is a real conspiracy, and their plan doesn't include you. Doesn't just mean doesn't include you for good stuff. It means they want to take it down to 500 million people. It doesn't include you. It doesn't include your family. Doesn't include your interests, doesn't include anything you got, and you have nothing to offer them that they care about. Well, they need the United States. No, they don't. They're on a path for world domination. You're a speed bump, and I don't care if you're in El Salvador or if you're in North Africa or if you're in Europe. You're a speed bump. They're thinking hundreds and thousands of years out into the future to get back where they think they came from. And you're thinking, till next week. They're laughing at you. Because you can't think big enough to even understand what their plan is. You're worried about whether you're going to be able to get stuff at Walmart or Target. They've thought of those things months and years ago, decades ago.
Time flies, by the way. I got to give you a 2-minute warning here.
All right. Well, I wish I could have taken some questions from the listeners. If you get 4 or 5 of them that need to be answered, the next time I come on, I'll answer those questions. And I hope people go back and listen to the presentation I did a few weeks back. Talking about the sub and the attempted strike on the U.S. Because I hope it puts it in context for all of them. I really appreciate your audience. I appreciate the opportunity to throw some thoughts out there, Doug. And my prayers are with everyone. Come to grips with this, that they will have clarity of mind, that they will have some divine assistance in coming up with their individual plan, not reading anybody else's mail, not looking to any other man solely for that direction, but that God will give them clarity of mind as they search out how they personally will begin to get ready for what's coming and make a difference. Because at the end of this whole game, hey, we win. Put that on your 2-minute news.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Doug.
God bless you, my friend. Folks, that'll do it for the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this 20th day of December 2013.
Always great to hear his insights.
Oh, man, absolutely.
So much information. We could do another few hours if we had the time. So we're going to have to do this again soon.
Absolutely. Don't forget to join us Monday for our special Christmas show. Join us on Christmas Day, the only day next week that we're going to take off to be with our family. We'll be on Christmas Eve. We're going to be here the rest of the week. Monday, a very special show. Pastor Langford and Steve Quayle. Until then, God bless you. Keep you safe. Good night.